You're in the back there. Give me a wave. Fantastic. Okay. Welcome to this afternoon's session at the MFPH Festival, or MFest as it's known. Welcome all of you for coming today and coming to the session after lunch, because I know some of you might just be ready for a nap at this stage. So thank you for coming. And we're going to just have a relatively informal discussion looking at career pathways and where people with a kind of mathematics background like yourselves end up and what they're doing in their work and how they got there. So really welcome anything that the floor would like to contribute. So please feel free. If you can add to a question or answer something, then do step in. And this, just valuable as we look at what kind of qualifications and experience we have and how we might be able to, whether we're going to stay in academia or perhaps transition to another company. And there's so many opportunities with your training. You're very highly skilled. So this will hopefully give you a chance to learn a bit more about people's experiences, both working in academia and this kind of threshold between the two, and then working in the private sector. So we'll just quickly go through our panel members. So we have a last minute entry, a wonderful James Uy joining us from the National Research Council. And he'll give you a bit of he's a research officer, but he'll give you a little bit of background himself. We have Natalie O from Bluedot, who's joining us, and she works on she's an epidemiologist at Bluedot, and I'll get each of them to introduce themselves. We've got Edward Thomas, who is a director at Vaccine Epidemiology and Modeling (VEM) Global at Sanofi Pasteur. I want to say Louis Pasteur there, apologies. And then, of course, I don't need to introduce Jummy to you, or Dr. David, because she is, of course, our very own original chair of the Next Generation Group. And she, of course, is now working at the CDC. So, but I'll just work from James through the group, and they can just give you a little bit of background on themselves. So, James, take it away.
Thank you. My name is James Uy. I'm a research officer at the National Research Council of Canada. It's a government agency, a federal government agency, where we are more involved with basic science research. I come specifically from the Digital Technologies Research Centers, and we have a collaboration office in this building itself. So it's called the NRC Fields Collaboration Center. So that's where I'm located, actually just right below us. And my day-to-day job is basically mostly on mathematical modeling for dynamical systems. I have a background in bioengineering, and my PhD was on tumor suppressor genes and how you model tumor suppressor genes and how you regulate those tumor suppressor genes. And during my postdoc, I was working on immunology and also oncolytic viruses. Again, pretty much all about mathematical modeling of all those viruses and how the immune system respond to oncolytic viruses and things like that. And fast forward from my postdoc, I was actually hired by IBM. Again, also on modeling and simulation, but more on cancer therapy. And after 3 years with IBM, I was actually hired by NRC in a very similar capacity as well. I think that's pretty much a quick introduction.
Great, thank you, James. So I'll pass it along to Natalie. Natalie, do you want to just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into your current role?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natalie Au. I work as an epidemiologist at Bluedot. Bluedot is a Toronto-based tech startup, and what we do is we use both artificial intelligence and human intelligence to really help identify, detect, and also assess global infectious disease threats and help our clients, who range from the private sector and the public sector, really help them rapidly inform any of the decision making that they may need to do on their end. My background as an epidemiologist actually might come as a surprise, because my training is with a master's in epidemiology and biostatistics. But what I actually did before was really focused in on chronic disease. I was doing real-world evidence research in diabetes. And how I came across Bluedot, I think I always knew about the company at the back of my mind. I always was very interested in exploring industry, and so when the pandemic happened and I was relocating back to the Toronto GTA area, I actually had reached out to the company. And I think my story is really one of being in the right place at the right time. And that's how I ended up here.
That's a great sort of origin story for getting into Bluedot, and actually just shows, if you see an organization which you think might appreciate your skills, you should reach out to them and see if they might be interested. And here's a great story of someone in a local being able to come home and join a local organization that's really well known, especially from their work during the pandemic. Thank you.
Hi, I'm excuse me, Ed Thomas, and I am sort of a dual kind of role, though my principal one is I think these days my title is modeling lead or global modeling lead for a group called Modeling Epidemiology and Data Science, or MEDS, which is within or as part of the vaccines division of Sanofi, what used to be called Sanofi Pasteur. The group that I'm with is actually based not in Canada, not with Sanofi Canada, but is based in France, in Lyon, where the headquarters of the Sanofi vaccines division is. And modeling epidemiology and data science actually describes very well the sorts of things that I do and that the rest of the team do there. A lot of it involves also not just things that we do internally, but projects with academia, with other external researchers. And one really good example right here in Canada is the Industrial Research Chair collaboration with York University with John Hongwu's group. And so as far as my background goes, it's a little bit circuitous. So my original background is actually in physics and astronomy. My PhD is in astrophysics from Queen's University way back in 2000. And I worked on planetary dynamics, celestial mechanics and things like that, and then exoplanetary systems, and trying to understand how stars, how planets around other stars formed, why they look the way they do, and so on and so forth. So I was more on the theoretical and computational side of that rather than my colleagues on the observational side. So there was a lot of numerical modeling involved in this, and a lot of computational work, some high performance computing. I was one of the people, I think, at some point, putting an undue load on SharkNet. And so how did I get from there to here? Well, I went through probably more postdocs than would be advisable to do, or more years of postdocs than would be advisable to do. And then I gradually kind of transitioned a bit more into applied math, and then I started to do some work on biomath at University of Guelph, and ended up working with somebody there who was working with a group at GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, another pharma company. And that's really the point where I started to transition, where I transitioned into industry, although not 100%, because I still maintain some academic affiliation. I'm also adjunct faculty in the Math and Stats department at University of Guelph.
Thanks, Ed. That was great. And Jimmy, do you have a mic? No, you can take.
Yeah. Thank you. First, it's really wonderful to see everyone today. So Jimmy David, and the former Next Generation Chair. It was a privilege to be a lead. I work as a public health analytics and modeling fellow at the US CDC. And what I currently do, I work on hypertension control and cardiovascular diseases. So we see that 1 in 2 American adults are diagnosed with hypertension every year, and about 50% of them are not on treatment. More than 85% are uncontrolled, either on treatment or but not controlled. So we saw that a 5 mmHg reduction in systolic blood pressure we cause 10% reduction in cardiovascular disease risk. So this is what I'm doing, optimizing secondary preventive measures to see how we can reduce this among American adults. And we're looking at awareness, looking at improving medication, because many are on SMBP, that's self-medication, self-monitoring blood pressure. So to cut everything short, we are looking at how to optimize policy designs to control blood pressure by age, by sex, and by different races in the US. And prior to CDC, I was working with Professor John Hu at York University in Liam's lab. I was working on COVID-19, informing policy design on Ontario, we're informing Ontario COVID-19 modeling group. So, and during my PhD, I worked on HIV and syphilis co-infection at WAIT's British Columbia Center for Excellence in HIV/AIDS. And there we looked at how pre-exposure prophylaxis could impact increase in sexually transmitted diseases or syphilis, gonorrhea, and many other diseases. Thank you.
So I was just going to cheekily jump in there, Jummy, and just say, given that you've just very recently sort of moved into this new role, how different has it? Like, if you maybe tell us a little bit about moving from and on her on this change from coming from York University and moving to US CDC. I think for a lot of people, US CDC is sort of the most famous agency in terms of just they're probably the ones who have the strongest communication globally in terms of their messaging. We're all interested to know. So it'd be really great just to hear how that transition's been for you, since it's so fresh and new in your case.
Yeah, I would say it's been wonderful. And I think the transition was easier based on my previous experience and working with one of the experts in disease modeling. So, but there are things that you cannot experience except you're in there and you're working there. So it's been a great experience. But talking about the research, how my past experience has prepared me or how to communicate the result. It's like in my current team, I'm the only modeler. I have medical doctors, I have economists, epidemiologists, engineers. And what I try to do is to communicate with them like babies. I assume in my brain that I'm talking to my 6-year-old daughter. So because if they don't understand what you're doing, then you have bigger problems. They're going to ask you frustrating questions. So you want to carry them along and be more explicit as possible, make things very simple, use non-technical words so that they understand what you're doing. And for example, the first time I met with my division director, the associate director, I introduced myself. And I saw the look on their faces. Like the first introduction was like, you have to be proud of what you're doing, right? So I introduced myself, but when they heard of the analysis, the prediction, and everything, they were like, what are you doing with this? So I said, okay, you're confused. And when they introduce themselves, I think it's the point here is that it's bi-directional. So, and I'm happy that they had a receptive mind. They were kind of receptive in kind of interdisciplinary approach. They believe that we speak different languages, and they were accommodating, and I also try my best to accommodate them because I was working on infectious diseases, and moving to non-infectious disease was kind of a bit challenging in the first month. I would say my first month there, I was reading a lot, reading about cardiovascular diseases, reading hypertension, coronary heart disease. I'm like, Jummy, why are you here? But now I really love it, and I think the project became kind of personal to me because my dad died of stroke. My mom is hypertensive, so it's like I just made it personal, and I wanted to learn more and know what is going on. So it's like, and looking at the data, digging deeper into the data, I saw, so many people are actually suffering from this silent killer. So it's like, and the first question I will ask here is, when last did you get your blood pressure measured?
Oh, that's a really great answer, Jimmy. And I'm sure for a lot of us, when we're in an academic environment, we usually feel that we don't have to over-explain what we're doing. Everyone understands. But once you join these teams with lots of different specialities and skills, they don't all have the same knowledge as you do. So learning how to communicate with non-mathematical modelers, and I think we all have this challenge, is something that is a really great transferable skill. If you can explain it to your, mother-in-law or your auntie or, someone in your family, then that might help you speak to the babies in your new toddlers in the new role. I think I quite like to hear from the room if you have some questions. So maybe if somebody would like, I can give you my microphone if you have a question. Okay, we don't have, do we have any questions in the chat? No? Okay, well then I have a list of questions here. So, okay, I'll start with you, James. What skill do you think has been particularly helpful for you since you are working for the government effectively, but also you're coming from this academic background? Like, what helped you in the role that you're in now that you think, I'm good at this. It's a good place for me to be.
So I have a very different background for the job that I'm currently at right now. Most of the teammates that I have in the current team, they are all comp science people who does machine learning quite a bit. And I come from, modeling and simulation, right? While we both, comp science and mathematical modeling has some mathematics background, however, we do speak very different language as well. So I think one of the most important attributes is the willingness to learn and not to be afraid when you are approaching something really new. Because I've not done machine learning during my PhD. I've straight up done system biology, dynamical systems, and applied math. But when I come into this team, you have senior research officers that has been doing machine learning all their life, right? They've been doing deep learning and all, and I have to pick them up and to be comfortable with that. It's really important. And then at the same time, you also have to tool your career, right? And the willingness to say that, hey, you know what? I'm going to pick up something new. And I decided to pick up quantum computing and how to code to run, at least a quantum circuit and things like that. I think that's important, and that helps me to kind of differentiate myself from the rest of the team, and also to kind of build my own career as well, right? So I think that's where I am right now. I don't know what's going to be in the future, but I think it's really important to keep inventing yourself as you progress in your career.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So just keep on learning and sort of upgrading your skills. Natalie, I have a question for you. So it'd be interesting to know how much of your time you actually do your modeling work, and what other responsibilities you have in your role, and it would, how much you get to apply what you learned through your training, and then what other sort of soft skills or other ones that you've taken on since you've started working at Bluedot.
So what I will say is, first of all, my background is not in mathematical modeling, so I do not do that, but Bluedot has plenty of opportunities, and my colleagues who are data scientists and mathematical modelers by training, and that is what they do. So predominantly what I do in my role is I do a lot of knowledge translation, and also understanding and writing reports, and really generating the content for our clients that range from both academics, scientific, non-technical audiences. And in this role, I really have an opportunity to work with our mathematical modelers and sometimes even help them translate their work and deliver it to clients in a meaningful way.
That's really interesting. So your ability to put these more complex ideas into layperson language so they can understand the work, that's really interesting. Edward, how about you? Is there any skill that you feel you've or skills that you've had to develop outside of academia that either you had and any training that you've sort of taken up over the years to keep yourself current or?
No, that's a great question. I mean, maybe the general one, just sort of from a mindset point of view. I mean, we've talked a lot about knowledge translation and how that becomes more complex when you have an audience that is not in the same field that you are, or maybe not even technical. And one of the things, I don't know if, I mean, one could probably call it even a culture shock that I realized after I started in academia is, I mean, after I started in industry, is in academia, if somebody's talking about something complicated and we're not quite following what it is, we tend to think, oh, that's probably my fault because I need to pay closer attention or I don't have enough background. In industry, that often gets turned on its head. So if you're speaking, as a subject matter expert on something, you're speaking to someone maybe higher up the organizational ladder, the chain of command, if you will. And you're explaining something and they're not quite getting it. Their attitude is not that it's their fault, that it's your fault. You didn't compress things enough. You got too much into the weeds. You, as they like to say, or you didn't focus on the relevant bits. And I mean, the thing that sort of sticks, one story or one. My story, I suppose it is, that sticks in my mind sometimes as sort of a guiding principle. And this being fields, I'm guessing a lot of people may remember this one or may have heard of this. So Laplace, famous mathematician, was actually briefly employed by Napoleon as the Minister of the Interior. And then there's this famous quote, famous quote by Napoleon, which is perhaps one of the greatest put-downs or wicked burns, you could call it, of anybody ever, where he says something along the lines of, although he was a mathematician of the highest order, we quickly realized we made a major mistake putting him in this role. He found subtleties in everything, and he brought he brought the spirit of the infinitesimally small to public affairs, and he got fired right away. So I guess, it's not something you want to say in a place like fields, but in this one instance, I always try to remind myself, don't be like Laplace. Yeah.
Okay, do we have any questions from the floor? Oh, yes.
Thank you. And you've all shared your experience of switching fields, going from even more physics-oriented science to biological science, or from biological systems dynamics to machine learning, and switching from academia to industry along with that. So I'm wondering how much of your previous education in your other field, how much help did that give you, or was that just sort of that provided maybe just the core perspective, but not necessarily the knowledge that's immediately helpful? Or and I'm just curious how the transition was really like.
Sungji, that's a great question. So whoever would like to answer first, but yeah, so what, were you sort of just felt like you were thrown into the deep end when you turned up and you're missing some skills? And this is really useful for people who are having training. Like what would have been, either you felt very comfortable and it was fine, or what would be some good training that might help you kind of cope with this new environment? And I don't know, maybe you should all answer this question.
And one thing that comes to my mind, I mean, the computational background in physics and astronomy that I had has, I think, always been very useful to what I've done. I mean, this sort of any sort of training, I think, that you have along those lines. I mean, this is very transferable. If you do modeling or numerical work in one field, I mean, from my experience, it absolutely carries over. Certainly the basic skills carry over, the ability to, relate mathematical concepts to computational stuff, the sort of intuition that's needed to, try to come up with the right level of abstraction for a model. Having said that, I mean, there are lots of key differences. For instance, one thing in my case, I mean, for celestial mechanics and things, you have to, just to go off on a slightly technical example, you have to worry about things like whether the trajectory you're computing depends on the time step that you're using, and so on and so forth. When I first started working on biomathematical modeling, I was obsessed with getting these SIR trajectories exactly, reproducible regardless of time step, and worrying about numerical instability. And then I realized after a while, numerical instability isn't really a thing anymore when you're dealing in integer numbers of things like people. So definitely, there's some rethinking needed, but I think the basic, in my case at least, I found that the basic training, the basic education has remained very useful, even if I'm doing something very different.
Jummy, do you want to answer that one, especially with your kind of near experience? How has it been?
So what I would say is when I was doing my PhD, I was in math. My PhD was in interdisciplinary, so I had the flexibility of taking math courses and public health courses. So I took some public health courses and some tough ones, when a mathematician take a course that there is no math in it at all. So it was really, really difficult. And I had to buy a textbook called Goddess. So I read this book, and it's about case control trials, randomized control trials, clinical studies, and all of these things. So it's like when you're a doctor and you're talking about, like, my CDC supervisor is always surprised when I'm talking about hypertension, because I read the in-depth of it, and they gave me time to read. I studied and in and out, and the first thing I came up with is, okay, American Heart Association had this Life Essential 7, which was created in 2017, and they stratify different hypertension stages, like when your blood pressure is greater or equal to 140 systolic and 90 diastolic, then you're in stage 1 or stage 2, I think. But then I have different studies that have showed that even when you are below, then you're hypertensive. So then they noticed that just this year they came up with Life Essential 8, which we stratified that we have from 120 systolic, we have elevated blood pressure, we have stage 1 blood pressure, and they had to update the divisions quick fast because of this. So I did a lot of reading, and that's the previous courses that I took was very helpful, because when doctors are talking, then I could relate to what they're saying. And when applied mathematicians are talking about modelings, I could relate with what they're saying. And engineers, when they talk about physics, it's pretty straightforward, I think. So it kind of gives me an interdisciplinary approach to thinking, I'll say that. And I also took a course which is statistical in health research in public health at UBC. And that course, we did regression analysis, multilinear regression, logistic regression, and how you can interpret public health questions. So all of these things were pretty helpful for me to be able to cope in that environment. And when I got to CDC, the projects that were given to us, I had to change, not change, modify the project, because it's like you want moving from hypertension to CVD is it's not straightforward in the modeling, so I had to remodify the model because I understand what they want. We want to achieve more people. We want to make sure we have more controlled hypertension. because right now 85% are uncontrolled. So all of this gave me ideas on how it works with doctors, mathematicians, epidemiologists.
I like that. So try and choose courses that are maybe a bit outside of your comfort level and get accustomed to language and the way of doing work in another field. Natalie, do you have something you could add?
I do. I would say that even though the disease context that I work in is very different from what I was trained in, my academic training absolutely is still very relevant. And I think hopefully many people here can also feel the same way. There are many elements of academic research that are still applied. Critical appraisal, being able to look at a methodology and understand the strengths, limitations, and what biases it can introduce. Being able to, as many of you here probably have also a quantitative background too. You will never have learned every model, every regression, or every approach that there is, but the experience of being in the academic training where at one point you had the solid foundation, but then you had the skills to learn more and learn a new methodology is definitely still really relevant. Yeah.
Thank you. And James.
I would say that one skill that I carried forward since the very beginning of my career is the debugging skills. My very first job was actually with Intel. I was a design engineer for Intel, and I was tasked to debug the architecture for the microprocessors that you guys are using. So there were a lot of bugs in new design. So debugging skills was really important, and I spent 4 years just debugging codes. And that actually helped me quite a bit when I go back to graduate school, when I build models and things like that. When things weren't working as it should, I know where to look. And I know how to push those codes into a high performance cloud because I used to do that at Intel. So a lot of these things helped me, with my PhD, with my postdoc, and even in my current job as well. When I come into this role, I can set up my own clusters. I don't have to wait for people to give me a cluster. I know how to set it up. I can teach my postdoc to do it, and it's really helpful. So debugging skills is something that I guess I carried forward over the years.
That's really interesting. I know I'm sure the kind of systematically working through things can be challenging. Do we have any more questions? If not, I might have one more. Does anyone have any more questions? Yes, Idris.
So in terms of the academic side, if you want to do research, so you need funding, you need materials. So maybe you can collaborate with other universities or other institutions. But in the industry side, since they are expecting an output for it, how does it work as a challenge to find the funding for the materials if they are expensive, and how things are doing for the industry?
Okay, does someone who wants to answer yet? Ed, do you want to answer this one?
Sure, I'll try. Well, I guess the thing that sort of substitutes for writing grants in the world of business, of industry, is you have to convince the people who have the budget, who have their hands on the budget, usually a couple of steps up or one step up the ladder, that the project that you want to do, or perhaps the project that you want to do with an external collaborator, has some business value, has some return on investment. Now, it doesn't have to be something as direct as, oh, this will help us sell more of medication A, B, C, whatever. A lot of it is also to do with advancing methodologies, just collaborating with some of the people who are actually doing interesting work in, say, if you're interested in influenza in general, things that people that are doing some cutting edge work in influenza and influenza modeling and so on and so forth. But I mean, of course, as you're alluding to, we can't really just do things, do research, do work simply for the the point of, or the objective of, intellectual curiosity and nothing else. But, ideally what we want to do, and I guess maybe my group that I'm in is a little bit luckier there sometimes than, is to do things that have an element of both. Because in our case, I mean, the outputs of things are not that different from what the things are that get measured in the academic world, and publications is a big one. So if you're doing something that is not, doesn't have any sort of originality, doesn't have any sort of scientific merit to it, then that is, just by itself is not that useful. But it kind of has to straddle the two. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of the big one. You don't apply for grants, but you do have to convince the people that give you the budget within the company that what you're asking for is going to have some sort of a benefit commensurate with how much you're asking for.
So it looks like we have a question online. I was just going to put it to Natalie, the same question, because I think both James and Jimmy are in sort of government branches where we know that they have things that they want to fund, and so it's a little bit less flexibility there, Natalie. But I was wondering what you know about Bluedot and how open they are to pursuing research for things that you're interested in.
So I think being situated on the R&D side of Bluedot, I think Bluedot is a very interesting place where I find that we still have opportunities for research towards sort of knowledge generation, but obviously we want to do it in a way where it still benefits what the needs are in the world. But I do find there is also balance of looking for market demand, and from a tech startup standpoint, I know my colleagues, what they have to do is try to figure out what their clients need, what they're not aware that they need, and really try to convince them and let them understand how Bluedot can help them reach what they are trying to answer.
So it sounds like there is a possibility to maybe pitch an idea that you think might be a solution to their problem, and that will give you a chance to interrogate the question that you're interested in. I'm wondering if there's someone who can actually read out the question, or if someone might want to unmute to say what their question is, because I can't quite see it on the screen. So if a person online would like to unmute, and we'll see if we can hear your question.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. Dr. David, thank you for the great presentation, panelists. I have a question for Dr. David. The question I often hear from most graduate students and postdoc is the decision of whether to move to academia or industry. So just curious, given her experience in the university and now in the CDC, her thought around that. And then secondly, I wanted to find out about the work culture, including promoting diversity and equity and inclusion in CDC vis-a-vis university.
Okay, thanks for your question. So I understand the second one. The first one, what was the first one?
The first one is going about making the decision as to whether to move to academia or industry.
Okay. So I think it depends on individual differences. It depends on what you want. For me, academia is fast-paced. This is a government job, so academia is fast-paced, and in terms of publication, you can have more publications, I guess, in academia. And with CDC, you have to go through a lot of things. First, you submit an abstract, you submit a protocol, you pass to clearance. So all of this time, you have your work or your manuscript has to be cleared before you can submit to any journal. And yeah, so that's one of the differences. And in terms of career trajectory, I think it depends. It depends on a lot of things. So if you need more time, maybe industry, and if you don't mind your time and you want more publications and stuff like that, you can consider academia. So yeah. But in terms of money, I think there is no much difference between both. So yeah, so and also the second one about equity, diversity, and inclusion. So from what I've seen so far before CDC, to be honest, I think they take this more seriously at CDC than anywhere that I've seen. So it's really impressive and it's really amazing that when you are talking, they respect culture, they respect languages, and they respect race, they respect gender, they respect so many things. And this makes work a lot easier. So when you're talking, the first thing that comes to mind is not maybe you know it or you don't know it. They believe that maybe it's the culture, maybe it's the language, because from our languages we can speak in different ways. You can say, oh, this person is aggressive, or this person doesn't speak well, or so many things. But in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion, they are at a higher level, and they keep that, and they don't joke with that. Let me put that.
Thank you very
That's
much.
really good to hear. Yeah. Sorry, Jude, do you have a follow-up question?
No, just thanking Dr. David. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that in one would hope in an organization like CDC that they would really have that worked out, but it's good to hear that's what you've experienced. So I was going to ask maybe a slightly more difficult question. So only because you might not want to answer, but I think it would be really great for the room to hear about some of your highs and lows getting into the positions that you're in. So sometimes people talk about how many interviews they had to have before they got their dream job, or how many jobs they applied for. And then sometimes even once they're in the interview process, how many interviews they had to have. So I would love to hear from all of you just about the sort of highs and lows of getting into the positions that you're in now. Back in the hot seat.
Okay, so I don't know if I want to directly answer the question, but let me go this way. So I would say that from all the applications, I think I interviewed with a local public health, and I got a feedback that was a little bit painful, because I said something. I think one of the is it alpha, no, Latin words like alphabet, beta or something, and they were like, alpha? I said, yeah, okay, assume it is A or B. Yeah, so it's like, it was kind of funny, so they didn't really understand, and I also felt that I didn't really understand them. So that was that. And what I did differently that I would like to emphasize on when I was applying for CDC job is, first, I didn't want to apply because I'm like, do I really want to move to the US or not? That was the first thing. And the second is, so what do they have to offer? Do they accept US citizens? I was reading the job post for about a week, checking everything, checking different things. So I did that as in more than I ever did for other jobs. And when I decided to apply, I went on the main websites and I checked out all their alumni, check out the particular program, check their current fellows, see where they're recruiting from, who are the people they're getting. I think usually I don't do this for for most of the jobs that I apply for, but I was just curious that I just wanted to be convinced that this is what I wanted. So I checked so many things that I wasn't supposed to check. I checked the research of the people that are there, because the roles, the job description. So I checked the research, I checked the money, I checked the policies, I checked everything. And after checking, I'm like, okay, so let me start the application. So when I started, I uploaded. So the application is like you upload your CV, then you start answering questions. So I uploaded my CV, then I started answering questions, and some of the questions were in my CV, but some of them were not. But as I was seeing the questions, I was copying and pasting the question in a file. So after answering all of the questions, you have a chance to re-upload your CV. So from all of the questions that I've answered, I had to edit my CV so that I could tune to what they want and that I have the skills. So this I rarely do for most of the jobs. And I think, yeah, so that was really great. And applying even some of the things that I wrote there are they still like my supervisor, we still reckon to them, we still talk about them. Oh, your application was this and that, and also to talk about the recommendation letters. I think I would say thank you to my referees, because I didn't know how stressful it was to write a recommendation letter for a CDC job. I thought it was just a regular reference letter, but when I got there, I heard that it was really as the application was. That was the same thing for the referees. I'm like, really? So our professors went through this, so it was really intense. Yeah. So I hope I stylishly answered the question.
I think that's excellent. So some really great tips there. The first one is do not fall out with your referees, because they may be asked to produce a really difficult recommendation letter for you. So, find out if they eat samosas or they like, they like chocolates, but I would definitely stay on their good side. And yeah, no, always fabulous advice to really look at that job role and make sure that all of your CV really answers the questions that they're asking for, or ask for the specifics. That's really good advice. Ed?
Lows. Well, I guess the lows for me were not so much in the transitioning to industry part. That kind of came out of circumstances and a bit unexpectedly. It was more in the lead up to that, when I had, I said that I did maybe a few more postdocs than one should entirely do, and I was at I lose count of them sometimes. One of them was actually right next door in the Canadian Institute for Theoretical Astrophysics for a couple of years. But anyway, if you count them up, it was too many. Of course, all that time I was, as one does, applying for faculty jobs. And now astrophysics is not exactly the number one choice you perhaps should have if you're looking for a field where there are a lot of faculty jobs, or where there are new positions being created. And most of them were in the US. And so that was an additional constraint. Then, of course, there's the dreaded two-body problem that we know about in academia. If your spouse, if your partner is also an academic, also has already a faculty position, as was the case in my case, then that's yet another small probability you're multiplying the other probabilities with. And different universities have a different level of sensitivity or receptiveness to this issue, which is something that affects many of us when we're applying for faculty jobs. Anyway, one can go on about that at length, and that's probably a bit of a tangent. But just in general, the sort of realization that this was a very difficult thing to do, if you're adding the two-body problem onto that, even harder. If you did want to make a go of it, realistically, you would have to contemplate being in a position where you and your partner would be living in different places. And so this is something where I think nowadays it's much easier to inform yourselves of these things ahead of time, to understand the realities, understand the probabilities, low probabilities. But I think the sort of gradual depressing realization that came along with this was the kind of a low point that actually, in my case, contributed a lot to, when just out of circumstances, the guy at GSK that we were working with, says to me, well, would you ever consider, going into industry? And I just sort of looked at him blankly because I really hadn't. But, the answer to that question that you ultimately give depends very much on what came before.
Natalie, do you want to speak to that?
I don't think I would qualify it as a low, but I think probably maybe just a challenge that I experience and many people also might is when you're coming across a lot of different job postings, maybe you look at it and you feel like, I'm not qualified. I don't check all the boxes off that job posting. But I think what I've tried to learn and to even combat that is just to know that you have, like, your academic training has given you so many skills. They're transferable skills. So it's really just learning how to frame what you've done before and convince your employer or whoever that, there is potential. And I think with hiring managers, they never expect to find someone who checks all the boxes because they want to hire someone who also has room to grow too. So I think sometimes you just gotta fake the confidence.
Yeah, it's really sound advice. James, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so this job that I'm at right now, I applied for it when I was doing my postdoc in Ottawa. So NRC is, a big organization in Ottawa. And when you're a postdoc at University of Ottawa, you were like, yeah, I want to work at NRC. So I apply, I put in resumes, nothing. So that was probably one of my lowest point during my postdoc. I was like, no one wants to hire me. What's, am I doing it wrong? But I would say I was surprised that IBM needed my skills. So in the meantime, I went and worked for IBM. And lo and behold, one day I saw an advertisement. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna give it another try. I applied to NRC again. And I guess the high point is I was shortlisted for an interview and I was asked to come in to this building, Fields, upstairs, to give a presentation about what I've been doing since my postdoc. I guess that was the high point in my life, in the sense that I've been applying, I've not gotten any reply, but things happen. I think about 4 years later, and I got a job with NRC, which is in a way it's my dream job. To do what I like to do, and yeah, it's been good.
Do we have any more questions from the room or online? Yes.
I want to say thank you to the panelists for the insights so far. So my question would be for those who have transitioned from either after PhD or after postdoc to the industry. So will you say the industry considered you as an experienced? So what I meant is does your postdoc experience count? Because usually in the industry, they will, maybe your salary, the position you will be offered will depend on the past experience you've had. So does your PhD and your postdoc counted for you when you were given the job?
Yeah, great question. Does Sarah want to answer? Jummy, back in the hot spot?
Yeah, so I would say at CDC for my fellowship, you need to have a PhD before you can be qualified for the position. And after this program, extendable for up to 5 years, you can move to another grade level based on your past experience or experience with CDC. So it does count.
I can say that if you were coming with what you feel is zero industry experience, they do sometimes give you a sort of, you can go for the 5-year march if you have PhD. So people will look at your PhD and say, okay, they only have 1 year, but they'll put more in. So I would apply if you feel like you're under experienced. People do recognize that there's a lot of training that goes into a PhD. So I'm not saying that my experience is exactly right. It depends on the organization, but my experience has been that that they do make a difference. So you can maybe go for a job. If it's asking for 5 years, you can say, okay, I have a PhD. And if they're not asking for a PhD, as Jimmy points out, if they're asking for a PhD, you need a PhD. This puts you already in a pretty unique cohort. But if you see that you have the transferable skills and you do not have a PhD, don't don't not apply because it says like 5 years or something. So because your PhD does make a difference. But I'd be interested to hear from the other three panelists as well.
Sure. I have a very different background in the sense that I was actually in the industry for 6 years before I started my PhD. So when I got my first job after my postdoc, those industry experience counts because it was still quite a bit of technology involved, and I was hired at IBM specifically because I was able to program a very special board called FPGAs. So they hired me for that, but also because of my PhD in biomedical engineering, and a lot of the application, like for cancer therapy, comes from that area. So it counted. When I got the offer from NRC, I had a bit of back and forth with them to sort of justify why some of my industry experience matters, beside my postdoc and PhD. But again, it's really how you justify them and what are the skills that is transferable. And sometimes your manager don't even know that matters. So you have to sort of make them see that.
And I would just add, when you're negotiating a salary, if they're trying to negotiate, you're coming in with zero experience. With a PhD, you're not. So just to be mindful of that. If you feel that you're getting a very low ball for what qualifications you're coming in with, then do try and negotiate, because you're not a year zero when you come in with a PhD.
I think maybe I won't speak from personal experience, but what I can say at Bluedot is we have hired individuals from a math background who come at the master's level, who have done their PhD and a postdoc, and all of that experience is valuable, and Bluedot recognizes that.
I mean, I would say in my experience, certainly just for where I've gone through and where I've been, I mean, the PhD has been very much valuable. And I think, as you were saying, it is a differentiating factor. It certainly matters also when you're talking about things like previous experience or equivalent of previous experience, and also salary. The team that I'm with right now, the modeling, epidemiology, and data science, everybody in that team has a PhD in something. So definitely, at least from my experience, a PhD is a very valuable thing. Also, if you're going into industry. With the postdoc experience, I think it becomes very much a matter of it depends. I mean, it's less direct. If it's something that gives you additional experience that is ultimately useful in whatever industry you go into, which it will tend to, then it certainly is valuable, even though maybe it's not as directly measurable for the people who are hiring you. In my particular case, I could say, or from my experience, I can say there is a point of diminishing returns. So if you find yourself having been a postdoc for more than, I don't know, there isn't a hard and fast number, but at some point you have to ask yourself, perhaps, might my time be better spent doing something else? But some amount of postdoc experience, I think, can certainly be useful. Oh, yeah.
For the diminishing return
The question. This is going to have to make me go through a depressing thought process. Okay, so let me count it up. So from my PhD, I went to UC Berkeley for my first postdoc, and I was there for 2.5 years. The last half, I was at a place called the NASA Ames Research Institute, which is also in the Bay Area. After that, I came back to Canada, which was when I was next door. So that's 3, 4, 5 years. And then I went back to the US again, to Northwestern University for another, I think that was just a year. So that's 6 or 7. Sorry, am I counting? I lost count already, but I'd say if you're up to 6, it's probably a bit on the high side, and the threshold may well be below that. I think in my case, I was maybe just a little bit slow on the uptake.
Well, your supervisor might be disappointed, but I would recommend that when you have your postdoc, I would continue to look out for opportunities, just knowing how short the funding can be. So I would always keep your eye out for opportunities in industry and projects that you might be able to join in, and you know, and they'll understand. People can be disappointed, but they'll understand if they can see it's a great step for you. So, you know, look out for yourself with your own career. Don't get sucked into someone else's project. Would be my advice for the room. There's probably a couple of research leaders here that would disagree with me, but I think
it reminds me that the disappointment angle. There was one collaborator that I was working with when I was in astrophysics, a wonderful guy, very smart guy. When I told him that I had been starting to dabble in a few other sort of applied math things like modeling population behavior, he just kind of looked at me for a while and he said, "Why would you do that?" Yeah, don't listen to, you're absolutely right, don't listen to people when they tell you that. Everything is valuable, and exploring your options is very valuable.
Well, we're at time, so I just want to thank everyone who's given all these answers, and I hope even if you didn't ask them, you've got some food for thought, and it's going to help you work out where you're going and what you're doing. But a round of applause, please, for our panelists.